Oh, good evening, my friends. What a day. Beautiful day out there. Little chilly, windy, but we'll take it. We'll take it. Um, what was I going to say? I don't remember now. Oh, some cool news to talk about today. We're doing good in our book. I think I accidentally I may have knocked our book off course. Let me take a look. No, right. Jurgis came back to the factory and to fill in to be a scab because the other people were on strike. That's right. And the guy he'd been working for was kind of like, I don't have anything for you right now. And you're really no good to me right now. So go back and be a scab and do the work. And that's where we left off. So Jurgis became one of those new American heroes, a man whose virtues merited compassion with those of the martyrs of Lexington and Valley Forge. The resemblance was not complete, of course, for Jurgis was generously paid and comfortably clad. He was provided with a spring cot and a mattress and 3 substantial meals a day. Also, he was perfectly at ease and safe from all the peril of life and limb, save only in the case that the desire for a beer should lead him to venture outside of the stockyard gates. And even in exercise of the privileges, he was not left unprotected. A good part of the inadequate police force of Chicago was suddenly diverted from its work of hunting criminals and rushed out to serve him. If you see me laugh here, the cat is flipping around on the table chasing her tail and is probably going to launch something at me at any moment. So, anyway, the police and the strikers also were determined that there should be no violence. But there was also another interested party which was minded to the contrary, and that was the press. On the first day of his life as a strikebreaker, Jurgis quit work early, and in the spirit of bravado, he challenged 3 men of his acquaintance to go outside and get a drink. They accepted. They went through Big Halsted Street, where several policemen were watching, and also some Union pickets, scanning sharply those who passed in and out. Jurgis and his companions went south on Halsted Street, past the hotel, and then suddenly half a dozen men started across the street toward them and proceeded to argue with them concerning the error of their ways. As the arguments were not taken in proper spirit, they went on to threats. And suddenly one of them jerked off the hat of one of the other 4 and flung it over the fence. The men started after it, and then, as a cry of scab was raised, and a dozen people came running out of the saloons and doorways. A second man's heart failed him, and he followed. Jurgis and the 4th stayed long enough to give themselves the satisfaction of a quick exchange of blows, and then they, too, took to their heels and fled back to the hotel in the yards again. Meantime, of course, policemen were coming on a run, and the crowd gathered, and other police got excited and sent in a riot call. So what happened was Jurgis and some of these other guys that were working, even though the others were striking, so they're scabs, they decided, hey, let's go out and get a beer. And they were recognized by the strikers as scab workers, and now they are being challenged and going to fisticuffs, but looks like they got away with this one. So, meantime, of course, policemen were coming on a run. Oh, we already said that. Sorry. Jurgis knew nothing of this, but he went back to Packers Avenue, and in the front of Central Time Station, he saw one of his companions, breathless and wild with excitement, narrating to an ever-growing throng how the 4 had been attacked and surrounded by a howling mob, and they had been nearly torn to pieces. While he stood listening, smiling cynically, several dapper young men stood by with notebooks in their hands. And it was not more than 2 hours later that Jurgis saw newsboys running about with armfuls of newspapers printed in red and black letters 6 inches high. Violence in the yard, breakers surrounded by frenzied mob. If he had been able to buy all of the newspapers of the United States the next morning, he might have discovered that his beer hunting exploit had been perused by some 2 score million of people, and had served as a text for editorials in half the staid and solemn business men's newspapers in the land. So Jurgis and this little fight, because he was a scab, made the news. They made the news all over the country. Jurgis was to see more of this as time passed. For the present, his work being over, he was free to ride into the city by a railroad direct from the yards, or else to spend the night in a room where cots had been laid out in rows. He chose the latter, but to his regret, for all night long gangs of strike breakers kept arriving, as very few of the better class of working men could be got for such work. These specimens of the new American hero contained an assortment of the criminals and thugs of the city, besides Negroes and the lowest foreigners, Greeks, Romanians, Sicilians, and Slovaks. So here we go. When we talked about immigrants, we talked about the old immigrants, we talked about the new immigrants, the immigrants that came later, Eastern, Southern European, right? Sicily, Greece, Southern European, Slovaks, Romanians, Eastern Europeans. They had been attracted more by the prospect of disorder than by the big wages, and they made the night hideous with singing and carousing, and only went to sleep when the time came for them to get up to work. In the morning, before Jurgis had finished his breakfast, Pat Murphy ordered him to one of the superintendents, who questioned him as to his experience in the work of the killing room. His heart began to thump with excitement, for he divined instantly that the hour had come and that he would become a boss. Some of the foremen were union members, and many of those who were had not yet gone out with the men. It was in the killing department that the packers had been left most in the lurch, and precisely here that they could least afford it. The smoking and canning and salting of meat might wait, but all the products might be wasted. But fresh meats must be had, or the restaurants and hotels and brownstone houses would feel the pinch, and then public opinion would start to turn. An opportunity such as this would not come twice to a man, and Jurgis seized it. Yes, he knew the work, the whole of it, and he could teach it to others. But if he took the job and gave satisfaction, he would expect to keep it. They would not turn him off at the end of would they not turn him off at the end of the strike? To which the superintendent replied that he might safely trust Durham's for that. They proposed to teach each union a lesson, and most of those foremen who had gone back on them. Jurgis would receive $5 a day during the strike, $25 a week after it was settled. Whoa. So our friend got a pair of slaughter pen boots and jeans and flung himself at his task. It was a weird sight. There on the killing beds, a throng of stupid black Negroes. Wow, that's kind of harsh words. And foreigners who could not understand a word of what he had said, mixed with pale-faced, hollow-chested bookkeepers and clerks, half fainting for the tropical heat and sickening stench of blood, and all struggling to dress a dozen or two cattle in the same place where, 24 hours ago, the old killing gang had been speeding with their marvelous precision, turning out 400 carcasses every hour. The Negroes and the toughs from the levee did not want to work, and every few minutes some of them would feel obliged to retire and then recuperate. In a couple of days, Durham and Company had electric fans up to cool the rooms for them, and even couches for them to rest on. And meantime, they could go out and find a shady corner and take a snooze. As there was no place for anyone in particular and no system, it might be hours before their bosses discovered them. As for the poor office employees, they did their best, moved to do it by terror. 30 of them had been fired in a bunch that first morning for refusing to serve. Besides a number of women clerks and typewriters who had declined to act as waitresses. It was such a force at this that Jurgis had to organize. He did his best, flying here and there, placing them in rows and showing them the tricks. He had never given an order in his life before, but he had taken enough to know, and he soon fell into a spirit of it, and roared and stormed like an old stager. He had not the most traceable pupils, however, see higher, boss, a big black buck would begin. And you doing like the way and all, sorry, F you doing like the way it does this job. You can get somebody else to do it. Then a crowd would gather and listen, muttering threats. After the first meal, nearly all the steel knives had been missing, and now every Negro had one, ground to a fine point, hidden in his boots. There was no bringing order out of such a chaos. Jurgis soon discovered, and he fell in the spirit of things. There was no reason why he should wear himself out with shouting. If hides and guts were slashed and rendered useless, there was no way of tracing it into one. And if a man lay off and forgot to come back, there was nothing to be gained by seeking him. For all the rest would quit in the meantime. Everything went during the strike, and the packers paid. Before long, Jurgis found that the custom of resting had suggested to some alert minds the possibility of registering at more than one place and earning more than $5 a day. When he caught a man at this, he fired him, but it chanced to be in a quiet corner, and the man tendered him a $10 bill and a wink, and he took them. Of course, before long, this custom spread, and Jurgis was soon making quite a good income for it. So Jurgis is taking bribes for not firing people. Wow. Jurgis has quickly become the man. In the face of the handicaps such as these, the packers counted themselves lucky if they could kill off the cattle that had been crippled in transit and the hogs that had developed disease. Frequently, in the course of 2 or 3 days of a trip, in hot weather and without water, some hog would develop cholera and die, and the rest would attack him before he would cease kicking. And when the car was opened, there would be nothing left of him but bones. If all the hogs in the carload were not killed at once, they soon would be down with this dread disease, and there would be nothing to do but to make them into lard. It was the same with the cattle that were gored and dying, or the limping with broken bones struck through the flesh. They must be killed, even if the brokers and buyers and superintendents had to take off their coats and help them dive in and cut the skin, or to cut and skin them. And meantime, agents and packers were gathering gangs of Negroes in the country districts of the far South, promising them $5 a day and board, and being careful not to mention that there was a strike. Already carloads of them were on their way, with special rates from the railroad, and all traffic ordered out of the way. Many towns and cities were taking advantage of the chance to clear out their jails and workhouses. In Detroit, the magistrates would release every man who agreed to leave town within 24 hours, and agents of packers were in the courtrooms to ship them right away. And meantime, trail loads of supplies were coming in for their accommodation, including beer and whiskey, so that they might not be tempted to go outside. They hired 30 young girls in Cincinnati to pack fruit. When they arrived, put them to work canning corned beef, and put cots for them to sleep in the public hallway, through which the men passed. As the gangs came up at night, under the escort of squads of police, they stowed away in unused workrooms and storerooms, and in the car sheds, crowded so close together that the cots touched. In some places, they would use the same room for eating and sleeping, and at night the men would put their cots upon the tables to keep away from the swarm of rats. Yummy. But with all the best efforts, the packers were demoralized. 90% of the men had walked out, and they faced the task of completely remaking their labor force. With the price of meat up 30% and the public clamoring for a settlement, they made an offer to submit the whole question at issue at arbitration. And at the end of 10 days, the unions accepted it. and the strike was called off. It was agreed that all the men were to be re-employed within 45 days, and that there was to be no discrimination against union men. So as they're making this, the cat is, I don't know, the cat must have had some good catnip today. What are you doing? What? Did you hear her yelling at me? So they made a deal with the bosses that none of the guys that walked out would get fired, and they had to be hired back within 45 days. So this was an anxious time for Jurgis. If the men were taken back without discrimination, he would lose his present place. He sought out the superintendent, who smiled grimly and bade him wait and see. Durham strikebreakers were where few of them were leaving. Whether or not the settlement was simply a trick of the Packers to gain time, or whether they really expected to break the strike and cripple the unions by the plan, cannot be said. But that night, they went out from the office of Durham and Company, a telegram to the big packing centers: employ no union leaders. And in the morning, when the 20,000 men thronged into the yards, and with their dinner pails and working clothes, Jurgis stood near the door of the hog trimming room, where he had worked before the strike, and saw a throng of eager men. With a score of two did I skip another page? With two of the policemen watching them. He saw a superintendent come out and walk down the line and pick out man after man that pleased him. One after another came, and there were some men up near the head of the line who were never picked, they being the union stewards and delegates, and the men Jurgis heard making speeches at the meetings. Each time, of course, they were louder murmurings and angrier looks, over where the cattle butchers were waiting. Jurgis heard shouts and saw a crowd, and he hurried there. One big butcher, who was president of the Packing Trade Council, had been passed over 5 times, and the men were wild with rage. They had appointed a committee of 3 to go in to see the superintendent, and the committee had made 3 attempts. Each time the police had clubbed them back from the door. There were yells and hoots, continuing until at last the superintendent came to the door. "We all go back or none of us do," cried 100 voices, and the other shook his fist at him and shouted, "You went out here like cattle, and like cattle you'll come back." Then suddenly the big butcher president leaped into a pile of stones and yelled, "It's off, boys. We'll all of us quit again." And so the cattle butchers declared a new strike on the spot and gathered their members from the other plants, where the same trick had been played. They marched down Packers Avenue, which was thronged with a dense mass of workers, cheering wildly. Men who had already got to work on the killing beds dropped their tools and joined them. Some galloped here and there on horseback, shouting the tidings. And within a half an hour, the whole packing town was on strike again, and beside itself with fury. There was quite a different tone in Packing Town after this. The place was a seething cauldron of passion, and the scab who ventured into it fared badly. There was 1 or 2 of these incidents each day, the newspapers detailing them, and always blaming them upon the unions. Yet 10 years before, when there were no unions in Packing Town, there was a strike, and national troops had to be called. And they were pitched battles fought at night by the light of blazing freight trains. Packing Town was always a center of violence. In Whiskey Point, where there had been 100 saloons, one glue factory, there was always fighting, and always more of it in the hot weather. Anyone who had taken the trouble to consult the station house blotter would have found that there was less violence in summer than any other before. And this 20,000 men were out of work, and with nothing to do all day but brood upon their wrongs. There was no one picture of the battle the Union leaders were fighting, to hold this huge army in rank, to keep it from straggling and pillaging, to cheer and encourage and guide 100,000 peoples of a dozen different tongues through 6 long weeks of hunger and disappointment and despair. Meantime, the Packers had set themselves definitely to the task of making a new labor force. 1,000 or 2 of strikebreakers were brought in every night and distributed among the various plants. Some of them were experienced workers, butchers, salesmen, managers from packing branch stores, and a few union men who had deserted from other cities. But the vast majority were green Negroes from the cotton districts of the far South, and they were herded into the packing plants like sheep. There was a law forbidding the use of buildings as lodging houses unless they were licensed for the purpose and provided with the proper windows, stairways, and fire escapes. But here, in a paint room, reached only by an enclosed chute, a room without a single window and only one door, 100 men were crowded upon a mattress on the floor. Up to the third story of the hog house of Jones was a storeroom without a window into which they crowded 700 men. Whoa. Sleeping upon the bare springs of cots, and with a second shift to use them by the day, and when the clamor of the public led to an investigation of these conditions, and the mayor of the city was forced to order the enforcement of the law, the Packers got a judge to issue an injunction forbidding him to do it. So the Packers, not the football team, but the Packers, the people that own all these buildings, all these businesses, they break the laws, but they own the judges, so they can just pay the judges off so that things are ruled on their side. Just in time, the mayor was boasting that he had put an end to gambling and prize fighting in the city. But here, a swarm of professional gamblers had leagued themselves with the police to fleece the strikebreakers. At any night in the big open space in front of Brown's, one might see brawny Negroes stripped to the waist and pounding each other for money, while a howling throng of 3,000 or 4,000 surged about. Men, women, young white girls from the country rubbing elbows with big buck Negroes with daggers in their boots. With rows of woolly heads peered down from every window of the surrounding factories. The ancestors of these black people had been savages in Africa, and since then they had been chattel slaves. They had been held down by a community ruled by the tradition of slavery. Now, for the first time, they were free to gratify every passion, free to wreck themselves. They were wanted to break the strike. When it was broken, they would be shipped away, and their present masters would never see them again. And so whiskey and women were brought in by the carload and sold to them, and hell was let loose in the yards. Every night there were stabbings and shootings. It was said that the Packers had blank permits, which enabled them to ship dead bodies from the city without troubling the authorities. They lodged men and women on the same floor. With the night, there would be a time of debauchery, scenes that had never been witnessed before in America. And as the women were the dregs from the brothels of Chicago, and the men were, for the most part, the ignorant country of they were ignorant country Negroes. The nameless disease of vice were soon rife, and this where food had been handled, which was sent out to every corner of the civilized world. The Union stockyards were never a pleasant place, but now they were not only a collection of slaughterhouses, but also the camping place of an army of 15 to 20,000 human beasts. All day long, the blazing summer sun heat beat down upon that square mile of abominations, upon tens of thousands of cattle crowded into pens whose wooden floors sank and steamed contagion, upon bare, blistering, cinder-strewn railroad tracks, the huge blocks of dingy meat factories whose labyrinth passages defied a breath of fresh air to penetrate them. And they were not nearly rivers of hot blood, but carloads of moist flesh and rendering vats of soap cauldrons, glue factories, fertilizer tanks that smelt like the craters of hell. There was also tons of garbage festering in the sun, and the greasy laundry of workers hung out to dry. The dining rooms littered with food and black with flies, and toilet rooms that were open sewers. It's, sounds like summer camp, right? Nice and fresh, healthy place to go. And then at night, when the throng poured out into the streets to play, fighting, gambling, drinking, and carousing, cursing and screaming, laughing and singing, playing banjos and dancing. They wwere working in the yards all the 7 days of the week. They had their prize fights and crap games on Sunday nights. Oh, excuse me. On Sunday nights, but they went around the corner and they might see a bonfire blazing. An old gray headed Negro, lean and witch like, her hair flying wild and her eyes blazing, yelling and chanting of the fires of perdition and the old blood of the Lamb, while men and women lay down upon the ground and moaned and screamed in convulsions of terror and remorse. Such were the stockyards during the strike, while the unions watched in sullen despair, and the country clamored like a greedy child for its food, and the packers went grimily on their way. Each day they added new workers and could be more stern with the old ones. They could put them on a piecework and dismiss them if they did not keep up pace. Jurgis was now one of their agents in the process. He could feel the change day by day, like the slow starting up of a huge machine. He had gotten used to being a master of men, and because of the stifling heat and the stench, the fact that he was a scab and he knew it, despised him, and he despised himself, He was drinking, developing a villainous temper, and he stormed and cursed and raged at his men, drove them until they were ready to drop with exhaustion. Jurgis has become one of the men. He's become the man. One day in late August, the superintendent ran into a place and shouted to Jurgis and his gang to drop the work and come. They followed him outside to where, in the midst of a dense throng, they saw several two-horse trucks waiting, a three patrol wagon load of police. Jurgis and his men sprang upon one of the trucks, and the driver yelled to the crowd. They went thundering away in a gallop. Some steers had just escaped from the yard, and the strikers had got hold of them, and they were ready, and they would be the chance of a scrap. They went out to Ashland Avenue gate and over the direction of the dump. There was a yell, and soon they were sighted, men and women rushing out of the houses and saloons as they galloped up. There were 8 or 10 policemen on the truck, however, and there was no disturbance until they came to a place where the street had been blocked with a dense throng. Those on the flying truck yelled a warning, and the crowd scattered pell-mell, disclosing one of the steers lying in its own blood. There was a good many cattle butchers about just then, with nothing much to do, with hungry children at home, and someone had knocked out the steer, and it was the first man can kill and then dress one in a couple of minutes. There were a good many steaks and roasts already missing. This called for punishment, of course, and the police proceeded to administer it by leaping from the truck and cracking at every head they saw. There were yells of rage and pain, and the terrified people fled into houses and stores, or scattered helter-skelter down the street. Jurgis and his gang joined the sport, every man singling out his victim and striving to bring him to bay and punch him. If he fled into the house, his pursuer would smash the flimsy door and follow him up the stairs, hitting everyone who came within reach, finally dragging his squealing quarry from under a bed or a pile of old clothes in the closet. Jurgis and 2 policemen chased some men into a barroom. One of them took shelter behind the bar, where a policeman cornered him and proceeded to whack him over the back and the shoulders until he lay down and gave a chance at his head. The others leaped the fence in the rear, balking the second policeman, who was fat, and as he came back, furious and cursing, a big Polish woman, the owner of the saloon, rushed in screaming, and received a poke in the stomach that doubled her over on the floor. Meanwhile, Jurgis, who was of a practical temper, was helping himself at the bar. The first policeman who had laid out the man joined him, handing out several more bottles and filling his pockets besides. And then, as he started to leave, cleaning out the balance with a sweep of his club. The din of the glass crashing to the floor brought the fat Polish woman to her feet again, but another policeman came up behind her and put his knee in her back and his hands over her eyes, and then called to his companion, who went back and broke open the cash drawer and filled his pockets with the contents. Then the 3 went outside, and the man who was holding the woman gave her a shove and dashed out himself. The gang having already got the carcass onto the truck, the party set out on a trot, followed by screams and curses, a shower of bricks and stones from unseen enemy. These bricks and stones would figure in accounts of the riot, which would be sent out to a few thousand newspapers within an hour or two. But the episode of the cash drawer would never be mentioned again, save only in the heartbreaking legends of Packingtown. I'm gonna read one more page. It was in the late afternoon when they got back, and they dressed out the remainder of the steer, and then a couple of the others that had been killed, then knocked off for the day. Jurgis went downtown to supper with three friends who had been on the other trucks. They exchanged reminiscence on the way. Afterward, they drifted into a roulette parlor, and Jurgis, who had never been lucky at gambling, dropped about $15. To console himself, he had to drink a good deal, and he went back to Packingtown about 2 o'clock in the morning, very much the worse for his exertion, and, it must be confessed, entirely deserving of the calamity that was in store for him. Uh-oh, the calamity that was in store for him. I think it's raining. I hear the rain. Yep. And he was going to the place where he slept. He met a painted cheek woman in a greasy kimono, and she put her arm about his waist to steady him. They turned into the dark room they were passing, but scarcely had taken 2 steps before suddenly a door swung open and a man entered carrying a lantern. "Who's there?" he called sharply, and Jurgis started to mutter some reply. But at the same instant, the man raised his light, which flashed in his face, so that it was possible to recognize him. Jurgis stood stricken dumb, and his heart gave a leap like a mad thing. The man was Connor. Connor, the boss of the loading gang, the man who had seduced his wife, who had sent him to prison and had wrecked his home, ruined his life. He stood there staring with the light shining full upon him. Jurgis had often thought of Connor since coming back to Packingtown, but it had been of something far off, and that nothing concerned, and now that did not concern him. Now, however, when he saw him alive and in the flesh, the same thing happened to him that had happened before. A flood of rage boiled up in him. A blind frenzy seized him, and he flung himself at the man and smote him between the eyes, and then, as he fell, seized him by the throat and began to pound his head upon the stones. The woman began screaming, and people came rushing in. The lanterns had been upset and extinguished, and it was too dark so they could not see a thing. But they could hear Jurgis panting and hear the thumping of the victim's skull. They rushed there and tried to pull him off. Precisely as before, Jurgis came away with a piece of the enemy's flesh in his teeth. And before, he went on fighting with those who had interfered with him until a policeman had come and beaten him insensibly. And so Jurgis spent the balance of the night in the stockyard station house. This time, however, he had money in his pocket. When he came to his senses, he could get something to drink, and he had a messenger to take a word of his plight to Bush Harper. Harper did not appear, however, until after the prisoner, feeling very weak and ill, had been haled into court and remanded at $500 bail to await the results of the victim's injuries. Jurgis was wild about this, because a different magistrate had chanced to be on the bench, and he had stated that he had never been arrested before, and also that he had been attacked first. And if only someone had been there to speak good word for him, he would have been let off at once. But Harper explained that he had been downtown, and that he had not gotten the message. "What's happened to you?" he asked. "I've been doing a fellow up," said Jurgis, "and I got to get $500 bail." "I can arrange that all right," said the other, "though it may cost you a few dollars, of course. But what was the trouble?" "It was the man that did me a mean trick once," answered Jurgis. "Who is he?" "He's a foreman at Brown's, or used to be. His name is Connor." And the other gave a start. "Connor," he cried. "Not Phil Connor." "Yes, that's the fellow. Why?" "Good God," exclaimed the other. "Then you're in for it, old man. I can't help you." "Not help me? Why not?" "Why, he's one of Scully's biggest men. He's a member of the War Whoop League. And they talked of sending him to the legislature. Phil Connor. Great heavens." Jurgis sat dumb with dismay. Why? "He can send you to Joliet if he wants to," declared the other. "Can I have Scully get me off before he finds out about this?" asked Jurgis at length. "But Scully's out of town," the other answered. "I don't even know where he is. He's run away to dodge the strike." It was a pretty mess indeed. Poor Jurgis sat half dazed. His pull had run up against a bigger pull, and he was down and out. But what am I to do? He asked weakly. I'm going to read one more page. This is getting pretty good. How should I know? Said the other. I shouldn't even dare to get bail for you. Why, I might ruin myself for life. Again, there was silence. Can't you do it for me? Jurgis asked, and pretend that you didn't know who I'd hit? But what good would that do when you came to stand trial? Asked Harper. Then he sat buried in thought for a minute. There's nothing unless it's this. I could have your bail reduced, and then if you had the money, you could pay for it and skip. How much would it be? Asked Jurgis after he had this explained in more detail. I don't know, said the other. How much do you owe? I've got about $300. Well, Harper replied, I'm not sure, but I can try to get you out for that. I'll take the risk for friendship's sake, for I'd hate to see you be sent to state prison for a year or two. And so finally, Jurgis ripped out his bank book, which was sewed into his trousers. He signed an order, which Bush Harper wrote, for all the money to be paid out. Then the latter went and got it and hurried to the court. Oh, here we are. We're almost done at the chapter. And explained to the magistrate that Jurgis was a decent fellow and a friend of Scully's who had been attacked by a strikebreaker. So the bail was reduced to $300, and Harper went in on it himself. He did not tell Jurgis this, however, nor did he tell him that when the time came for trial, it would be an easy matter for him to avoid the forfeiting of the bail, and pocketed the $300 as his reward for risking and offending Mike Scully. All that he told Jurgis was that he was now free, and that the best thing he could do was clear out as quickly as possible. And so Jurgis, overwhelmed with gratitude and relief, took $1.14 that was left out of his bank account, put it with the $2.25 that was left from last night's celebration, and boarded a streetcar and got off at the other end of Chicago. Chicago. We are almost there, my friends. We've got 4 chapters to go. 4 chapters. We are doing awesome. Thanks for reading a little late with me. That worked out good. All right, let me write down the page that we finished at. All right. Man, this is getting exciting. This is getting exciting. All right. Well, so what do we... Uh-oh. Wait a minute, I flipped the wrong way. There we go. So what do we got for news today? Let me close the Kindle so it doesn't drain out here. Okay. So watch the news conference today for the governor, and it was a little tense at times. Not gonna lie, a little tense. But here's what we got. We've got some more information, and again, as they are looking at information, they're looking at new models, they're looking at different ways to crunch all this information. So one of the things that they talked about today was that hospitalizations they were going down, and now they've really kind of done this. They're still slowly decreasing, but they've really kind of flattened out a little bit. The number of people that died in New York State actually went up a little bit. So, that may not be like it's horrible, right? But it didn't double. The amount of deaths went up, I think, 5 or 6. But it's still, it's kind of flattening, but we really want it to boom, right? We just want it to stop. So, the governor is, I think, hoping that it would be a little better. But we'll see. We are now 8 days away from reopening the state and doing the first unpause. And one of the things that was very interesting is, this is one of the things that the governor talked about today. And I guess people have been saying to him, we should just open the state. People are going to die anyway. So to this, and this is when he was really kind of getting fired up, he kind of said, well, yeah, everybody dies, right? But if we can prolong life, if we can keep people from sensefully or sensibly, we want people to sensibly and go at their own time. Um, so he went on about this for a while, and he was not very happy at uh, that. I guess this has been the biggest argument that people have been bringing to them. Oh, people are going to die anyway, so go ahead and just reopen the state. So what he talked about though today was, and I guess he kind of went from that into this. So one of the things that's kind of interesting is that he brought up a couple different counties, and he said, like, in this county, this percentage of people had the coronavirus. Let's say, I don't know, 20%. And if you look at the amount of hospital staff and medical workers that are getting the coronavirus from dealing with all these people, was 10%. Then he brought up another county, and it was like almost half the percent. So it was kind of interesting. But what he's saying is that the PPE, all that kind of stuff is necessary, right? The people that are becoming in contact, that's drastically driving down the chance of you getting it. So now they're saying, when we reopen, that you've got to have a 90-day COVID level supply of the PPE to really have your region, your county, your area ready to roll. So, things are working. It looks like things are working. But they're just not, this is not going away fast enough. And one of the things that they noticed too, again, looking at all this data, is that where the group of people, so right, we used to have like the older people, and then we had the younger people. These were the people that were most susceptible. And now what they're saying is that the people that are most susceptible are people 51 years or older. So this is the group that's getting hit right now. So I am 5 years away from that. So I'm not like, worried and like, I'm not going to leave the house, but, I'm getting there. And the thing is like what he said is he would not consider 51 years old. That's middle age, right? I mean, it really is middle age. So, it's changing, like that's part of what I think he's talking about, is this disease, this virus is changing. So one of the things today too is one of the people, and now I forgot what question. Somebody asked him a question about reopening. And what was it? What was it? Anyways, the reporter asked him a question about reopening, and he did the typical politician dodge, totally dodged it. And the reason I bring it up is that I don't think he's done that a lot. I have friends that are very liberal. I have friends that are very conservative. I have friends that are, just kind of in the middle of the road where I am. And, I've talked about this in class before. I'm not registered to a party. I'm not overly happy about either party, but I can't tell you how many die-hard conservatives I've seen posts on Facebook. Hey, Cuomo, he's doing a pretty good job. I mean, really, there are plenty of conservatives out there bashing him, but there's a lot of conservatives out there that are pretty happy, Republicans that are pretty happy with the way he's rolling with things. I think that's given him a lot of confidence, and he's really done a solid job in answering questions. But today, and I don't know, you know what it might have been too, is it might have been that he just had been maybe he was just sick of answering the same reopening question. But this person asked him the reopening question, and he just went right around it, didn't answer it, moved on, didn't even come near answering it. So some news out of. Is there anything else out of New York? Okay, no, I don't think so. Well, okay. So one of the things that they're talking about, right, is that there's been this hip phrase, that there's, oh, what's the new normal? What's the new normal? What's the new normal, right? And now there are, sociologists, there are people who are looking at us and the way we're living. And what they're saying is that now food pantries are becoming the new normal. We are becoming a country where more and more people are on a daily basis going to food pantries and receiving food to get by. And we've never really had it like this before in our country. I mean, there certainly have been times where we have gone through recession and depression and people have needed assistance, but not to this scale. So what we don't want is we don't want that to be the normal. We don't want people needing every single day to go get bags of food from other people. We don't want that. And I'm glad that we at least have people that can come together and mobilize and be able to do that. And there's a good side of it, but there's also a bad side of it. So I hope you get what I mean. We got to fix that, right? We got to fix that. So oh no, here's another. Well, I'll save that for last. That's a good, happy little thing. So out of the White House today, a lot of oh no, there is one more New York thing. Sorry. Governor Cuomo is pushing back no evictions, no foreclosures until August 20th. So he's pushing that back 2 more months. So if people are not paying their rent, they cannot be evicted until August 20th. My prediction on that, my friends, is that's going to get pushed back until next year. I think that they will continue to push that back. If somebody's been out of work for 5 months and they're just going back to work and they're not making a lot of money, right? They're not going to be able to hand over hey, landlord, here's 4 months worth of rent, right? They can't do that, or 4 months of mortgage, And Congress has talked a couple times about suspending mortgage and rent payments for a year. Which, woof, boy, that would be real interesting, right? That would be real interesting. I don't know that they necessarily have the power to do it. They might, and they might be able to give themselves the power to do it. But, one of the things I was talking to my son about today is that, people that are not affected by this right now are going to, or at least have the ability to even more improve their station. Okay. And I gave this example, right? Here's an example. If you are a person right now that is still employed and you still have making good money and you have some money in the bank and you are a wise person, okay. And I'll be honest with you, if I had a good chunk of money sitting in the bank right now, I might do this. is that, people are going to take advantage of investments. So they are going to look for things to invest in that maybe have taken a dip right now, right? But they know that one day that thing is going to rebound once things start to get better, right? And if they do that, once those things get better, their fortunes will triple overnight, right? If you look at the subprime mortgage crisis, what happened, right? These handful of men exploited this little loophole. And as people around the country, millions of people are losing their homes around the country, this small group of men never had to work again. And they made so much money that their children would never have to work a day in their lives. As a matter of fact, they made so much money that their grandchildren and great grandchildren would probably never have to work a day in their lives. They became exceedingly rich. And I remember when the Great Recession hit in 2008, 2009, the subprime mortgage. I remember my wife and I at the time, our mortgage company literally called us and said, here's the deal. You are a platinum whatever level. You pay your payment every month. You pay extra every month. You are in the best standing that you could be in. We want to make it better. So right now, we're going to give you a home equity loan for some ridiculously low rate. And we looked at it and we went, why do we need this? And the mortgage guy said, well, here's the deal. We'll give you the home equity loan. We noticed that you have a car right now. Well, that car, you're paying interest on that car at this percentage. Well, if we give you this home equity loan, you're going to pay off the car, and then you're going to pay back the home equity loan at this percentage right down here. Oh, okay. Well, also, you have, what was it? We had the car and something else. I can't remember. And bam. And we went, well, we just saved like $300 a month on our budget by borrowing money, right? So if you're doing good right now, you can even come out of this better. So, we talk about there's this word, right? There's a disparity of an income disparity where we have uber rich, middle class, and a lot of poor people. And the distance between the uber rich and the poor are just getting bigger. And the number of people in the middle class people, that number is getting smaller because those middle class people are falling off into that lower level. And that's what's happening to a lot of people right now. And I have seen a lot of people complain about unemployment. I saw somebody today on the Facebook complaining that, it's week 6 and she still hasn't gotten any money out of unemployment yet. And she's been applying every single week. So I don't, it's rare though, because I've seen a lot more people, and I actually didn't even realize how many people I knew that had been getting unemployment. And they've been getting it from like day one. So, it's not, none of this is easy, but we hope that people are doing the right thing, and we hope that people are truly using the money in the right way. And like I talked about last night, there's this $500 billion that's about to be borrowed and then infused into the economy. And I just want to make sure that wherever this money goes, people are using it in the right way. And again, like I told you, my debit card idea, right? Well, what if we just did this for everybody, right? If the real problem here is people getting food, well, we know what SNAP cards are. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Well, what if the families that got this $1,200? What if they got a $1,200 SNAP card? Bam, right? Then that they have to go and they have to use that money on food. And then the other money that they have, they could use for those pay the cable, I don't know, whatever, well, you'd assume if you couldn't pay your family, or you can feed your family that maybe you would have canceled the cable, right? So I don't know. It is a tough call. It is a tough call, but and I certainly would not want to be the dude making these decisions. I'm kind of rambling tonight, and I think that's okay. Um, so out of the White House, a couple things. The CDC gave the White House a report. Hey, White House, this is how states should reopen. And apparently the White House went, oh, yeah, look at that. Boom, and they rejected it. Yep, no. So last night we heard about a FEMA report that the White House went, yep, nope. And now there's a CDC report that the White House has said, yep, nope. And what I guess the CDC report, or what the White House didn't like about it, is that it set these parameters. And the White House said, well, different states have been affected differently. So not every single state would have to follow these parameters. And what I saw was the CDC and people that are looking at the report are kind of going, yeah, everybody. If Wyoming wasn't hit as bad, then they've already made it past this part of the plan. They get to start down here. So, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, you got to do this, this, and this before you get here. You got to do this, this, and this before you get here. You got to do this, this, and this before you get here. But if Wyoming if it never made it if it was never that bad in Wyoming, they get to start here. But the White House, they got rid of it. No thanks. And that's what they literally did. They made that sound effect. And they tossed it. Check it. Fact check me on the sound. Anywho, the other thing, and this is a little scary, President Trump's valet. So one of the people that works with President Trump on a daily basis and deals with taking care of his things, has COVID. So I guess the president was tested again, and he does not have it. But another person very close to him has it. Apparently, there was quite a large number of nurses that were protesting outside the White House today because of what they feel is not enough support to the medical community in all of this. And we'll see if that's going to become a daily thing. But this is also, is this Nurses Week? I think it is Nurses Week. So that's probably why the nurses are assembling today and this week there. The other news out of the White House is that this Friday a jobs report comes out, and they are expecting, because there's another 3.6 million people, 3.2 million people that applied for unemployment this week. Unemployment is going to go over 20%. So if this is true, and if things are truly headed the way that they think things are going, unemployment will be over 20%. So, during the Great Recession, 12 years ago, I guess you could say at this point, in the Capital District, and I remember I had just started the job at Mahonison, and this fact will stick with me for a long time. For every one job that was available in the Capital District, 5 people needed it. So this is almost twice as bad. So if we think that is an accurate formula, that means for every one job that's available in the Capital District, there's almost 10 people that need it, right? More like 9, I guess. If we did the exact math there. So that ain't good, right? And we're not talking about jobs at Golub cleaning at night. I know that there are a lot of places that have now opened up opportunities for people. So I know a couple students had told me that's like at 8:00 at night, they go to an office building and they clean for 8 hours. Because that's what we need, right? Right now, that's what we need. And I guess they can do their schoolwork at other times. But the real career jobs, right? So that's not good. That's a lot of people out of work. I expect that right now you can get that additional $600 a week, I think, through July, since the governor pushed back the eviction and foreclosure to August 20th. I have a feeling that that extra money in unemployment is going to get pushed back too. What else? What else? What else? So, interesting news, kind of sad news. Tomorrow we'll really know more about the unemployment number and how they calculate that. But the last thing, so, the farm that I work out, a lot of different places, these like distilleries, and actually, I'm not, hold on. I'm right here, not going anywhere. So when I paint my little miniature guys, right, you see this, it's Army Painter Ash Gray and Army Painter Oak Brown, right? So these are the little paint bottles you buy, and this is paint that's formulated for the little miniatures. And anyways, so this company, the Army Painter, has stopped production on their paints because they realized, or they found out, that they could take the machines that they use to make paint and they could make hand sanitizer. So I think this company, I want to say it's Belgium, Denmark. Same thing, right? That's what you want to hear from a social studies teacher. Belgium, Denmark, I don't know, Germany. It's all the same crap, right? Anyway, so they make this in Denmark. Do they make all of them? Let's see. Yep, they make all the colors in Denmark. Anyway, so they've stopped production on their paints, and they're making hand sanitizer. So there's a local, and I've never been to this apple orchard, the Golden Harvest Farm. They are now making hand sanitizer out of apples. So, I don't know, you can sanitize your hands and, make your house smell better, and I don't know, whatever apple, maybe you could use it as like apple flavoring too. I probably shouldn't say that. I don't want to get like the whole Trump and injecting chemicals and stuff, but but anyway, so you can make hand sanitizer out of apples, and the same machinery that makes war paint for Mr. Merton's geeky little miniatures, you can also make hand sanitizer too. Anywho, so on this day in history, my friends, in 1763, right after we begin to move west, right? Because, hey, we won this land from the French, or I should say the British. We were British colonists, right? During that war. Well, we win all this land. Well, we want to move out there. Well, one of the big rebellions with the Native Americans that were out there, right? It wasn't just trees and rivers and grass. There were people living out there. One of the big rebellions between Native Americans and the British moving west takes place, and it began today, Pontiac's Rebellion, with a big attack basically on what is the fort that was at Detroit? I think that might be Fort Michilimackinac. I don't remember. And I didn't make that word up. That's a real fort. On this day in 1915, the Lusitania was sunk. So we had talked about the Germans and their U-boats in World War I attacking ships. Well, they sink the Lusitania. There's like 125 Americans on it. All right, Germany, that's it, right? With that and with the Zimmerman telegram, we are in the war. On this day in Reims, in, I don't know, one of those European countries, the German army officially surrenders to the American army. And we refer to today as VE Day, right? Victory in Europe. VE Day. On this day in 1947, Levittown is announced. The building of Levittown. What the heck is Levittown? Suburbs. So, where we are about to get to in world history, we have about 5 weeks left, or in U.S. history, excuse me, is that as World War I or World War II ends, and we have millions of GIs coming home, well, they've got the GI Bill, they've got money, they want to go get some jobs, they've fought this big war. Well, now they want to start families, and now they want to, have that America that they fought for. So the Levitt brothers announce a 2,000, they're going to build 2,000 houses in a community. Your house, your picket fence, your garage for your new car, blah, blah, blah. And they will continue to build these places, and the suburbs are going to start to grow right throughout America. And you can still see these places. An example might be, is it Colebrook Manor, or is there Colonial Manor in Rotterdam? I should probably know this. Is it Colebrook? Colebrook, like a little cul-de-sac community. I mean, we're talking Levittown was 2,000 houses, right? They all look the same. You could go into one house, you can go into the next house. They were all laid out the same. But they were great, affordable housing for these GIs that were coming home. And they were very desirable. It wasn't living in the inner city. You weren't living in some rural area. You were in a place where you had a nice house, a nice neighborhood. The people around you were people just like you. And, you had what you spent all that time in the war fighting for, the American dream. On this day in 1946, Sony was founded. Sony, the Japanese, what would today is a mega corporation. So about a year, I guess not even a year after the war ends, Sony is created. On this day in 1954, again, this kind of leads into one of the things we're about to talk about, is after World War II, the French, because they had gotten the crap beat out of them, are very eager to, after World War II, begin to regain some of their colonies and regain some of their colonial power. So they very much so want to retain a hold in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. French Indochina is what you learned, what it was called in global history. And one of the countries in which they are entangled is the country of Vietnam. And on this day in 54, the French actually are defeated by the forces in Vietnam and are forced to surrender. So the Battle of Dien Bien Phu is a very, not so much a prideful moment for the French military. They really thought that they had superior weapons, tactics, the whole deal. And they are defeated pretty badly. And this is when we start to get involved in supporting them and supporting democracy, because communism will begin to grow, especially in North Vietnam. So we don't start dropping soldiers in there, but we start sending in what we call military advisors. And for the first 7 or 8 years of this, basically, we send in advisors to train troops, and I guess you could kind of say to support them to fight the North Vietnamese. However, our soldiers are not allowed to shoot unless somebody shoots at them. So once somebody shoots at them, they are allowed to fire back. And you might have seen that movie with Mel Gibson. We Were Soldiers, I think is what they were called. Or it was called. Gone for Soldiers. We were soldiers, gone for soldiers, something like that. And it's about some of the first military advisors that go into Vietnam after the French get their butts kicked. Last but not least, so on this day in 1994, you guys might know this painting by Edvard Munch, right? The Scream. And the Scream was in a museum in Norway, and it was stolen. And on this day, which was 3 months after it was stolen, it was finally recovered and recovered undamaged. So that was kind of a neat little funsy on this day in history. The Scream was found. When I was in college, I designed a set for a play called Black Comedy, and it was about this this artist who who really was kind of a crappy artist. And what he did was he copied other artists, and it was the whole play takes place in his apartment, his studio apartment. And what we did was the walls of the set were big kind of crappy recreations of different famous paintings, and that's what we did. We repainted the Scream, Edward Munch's the Scream, and that was really cool. That was the first time I had ever. I think I was a sophomore or junior in college, and that was a really neat time. I never had studied a lot of fine art, but that's one of the things I loved about theater. Is theater brings in fine arts, it brings in music, it brings in, of course, theater, it brings in acting, it brings in history, it brings in politics. There's a lot of really cool stuff, and that's what I really did love about the theater world, and that I sometimes miss. But anywho, my friends, it is it's a little late tonight, but I thank you for joining me. And as always, we're running the race, my friends, right? We're running the marathon. We're not sprinting. I don't know if we see the light at the end of the tunnel yet. I don't know. Maybe we do. Maybe we see the light, but the tunnel's still, the end of the tunnel is still ways away. So keep running the marathon. Don't sprint like it's about to end. And we'll get there. We will get there. All right, my friends, be good. Stay out of trouble. Hey, we'll see you tomorrow night, and probably tomorrow night while we're reading, maybe I'll open up the windows and we'll see the snow falling. Right? Snow in May. All right, guys, be good. I miss you. Stay out of trouble, and be safe and be healthy.